Thursday, March 25th, 2021 meeting of the Finance Committee to order. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Laws, Chapter 38, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the Chelmsford Finance Committee will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information, the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and/or parties with a right and/or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the town's website at www.chelmsfordma.gov. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch the meeting may do so by accessing the Chelmsford Telemedia website, www.chelmsfordtv.org. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on the town's website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive recording of the proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. Please note, if you would like to watch this meeting but do not plan to present the committee or speak during public comment, we ask that you please do so at live.chelmsfordtv.org or on your television, Comcast 99 or Verizon 37. By doing so, it will help reduce demand on the online meeting platform. Thank you. And just as a reminder, this evening we have the chat open. All chats, even if you believe that they are private, are part of the public record and will be made part of the public record upon posting of the meeting minutes. We're following the public and posted agenda this evening. First on our agenda item is the approval of minutes. So we have two sets of minutes, one for March 11th, 2021 and one for March 18th, 2021. We put off March 11th. Everyone had a chance now to review them.
Yep.
All right. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to accept the meetings from March 18th and March 11th as presented.
Kathy, can we do it in order, please? March 11th and then take a March for March 18th.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do you want them to be separate motions?
Yes, please. I think there might be some comments on one of them.
Okay. I'd like to make a motion that we accept the minute notes from March 11th, 2021 as presented.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. 7-0, Pam. Next, we have the March meeting minutes from March 18th, 2021. Has everyone had a chance to review them?
Yes.
Okay.
Make a motion that the minutes of March 18th be approved as presented.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Any questions?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. I had a question on some of the numbers. I was just having trouble tying out.
In the minutes themselves?
That was my only question. And if you asked me which one, it had to do with the DPW, if I'm not mistaken. I can't find it to save my life.
That was the 11th, I believe. And
oh, did I pull the wrong one?
Yeah, I don't believe there was any DPW last week.
Oh, never mind then. I got my minutes confused. I had questions on the 11th and not the 18th.
I'm sorry.
If there's a need to amend the minutes based upon an error in the minutes, we can certainly do that at a future meeting, Anita.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that, guys. I thought it was the 18th.
Okay. So with the 18th, we have a first and a second. Any further discussion? No. Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you. All right. Proceeding with our agenda, we have a review of warrant Article 33, so transfer of land that will be held in the Conservation Commission from the town of Chelmsford. And with us this evening, we have the chair of the Conservation Commission, David McLaughlin. Thank you. How are you?
Good. Couldn't be better after 2 shots in 2 weeks.
All right. So this seems to be a pretty straightforward article, Dave. It's transferring a number of parcels over from the town into and under the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission. Anything you'd want to add about that, or present or discuss about that?
Sure. Thank you very much for inviting me to attend your meeting. Periodically over the years, the town acquires various parcels of property and the town manager and the Board of Selectmen review the properties that they own, and they are often, most cases, they are acquired by tax taking, or that people have said, hey, I don't want the land anymore, it's too small. Will the town take it? Will the town buy it? There are various ways for the town to acquire it. And it goes through the town manager and the Board of Selectmen. And then every couple of years, we take a look at how many parcels those are and where are they. And some of them lend themselves to being transferred to the Conservation Commission. These parcels here are all on Willis and Shore Drive, which every one of them, I believe, are pretty close, almost every one of them, abuts Freeman Lake. It's very important for the Conservation Commission to preserve the shorefront along Freeman Lake. None of these parcels, I think, are really developable. A few may be, but most of them are pretty small. And most of them abut each other, if you look at, if there's a map available. So that although I don't think they are large enough in the aggregate to create a reservation, what may be appropriate, and we will take a look at it, is, as all of you, I'm sure, are aware, in the Open Space Master Plan proposal of a few years ago, there's a recommendation that the town build more pocket parks, which are defined as small parks. I think a good example is the one that was just built in front of the funeral home on North Road. There may be three or four parcels that abut each other that are on Freeman Lake that would lend themselves to that, which would allow the residents of North Chelmsford and abutting Freeman Lake to take advantage of it. The other reason that we want to acquire property like this is that up at Freeman Lake, a lot of private homeowners believe that their property exists to the shorefront, when in fact it doesn't. So this would allow us to make sure that activities along the shorefront are at least under our observation. So that's why we would like to acquire it this year.
Thank you. Any questions?
Where is Taunton Street? Is that also near the Freeman Lake?
I don't have a map in front of me. I can't answer that. John Souza might know. John's on, right?
Let me see if I
Hi,
can.
everyone. I can check that out in our GIS system and get back to
Yeah,
you.
it is, Kathy.
Probably is. If you look at
is.
the lot numbers, it's close to a couple of lots on Shore
Right.
Drive.
It's adjacent to Shore Live, but has an address on Taunton Street.
Thank you.
It's mostly wet, so even though it says 2 acres, it's not 2 dry acres. I can assure you, we would never make it to the town if we're 2 acres of buildable dry land.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Seeing none. Let's check the chat. All right. Thank you very much for being there this evening.
Thank you.
All right. Next on our agenda this evening, we have a review of warrant article 32, which is the grinder pump bylaws. It's a citizen petition being presented by David Foley, and he's with us this evening. Thank you for being here this evening.
Okay, thank you for inviting me.
And I will just pop up your slides here. Give me 1 second.
Okay. I should mention I'm the president of the Grinder Pump Homeowners Association in Chelmsford, and we go by the name of the Sewer Fairness Alliance. Just as a way of introduction, I'm the petitioner, but I'm petitioning in behalf of the Sewer Fairness Alliance.
Screen.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, Article 32, I refer to that sometimes as a grinder pump homeowner bill of rights because it's really a list of protections for grinder pump homeowners. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, thank you. And I'm going to point out four main parts of this rather than to read through the actual article because the language is somewhat in legal terms, but we can certainly read through it if you'd like. But before doing that, I'd like to just point out the four important parts to it. So with the current grinder pump bylaw, the town is responsible for the maintenance and repair of residential grinder pumps. But there is a clause which would hold a homeowner responsible if there were to be abuse of the grinder pump. But what's not in the bylaw is a procedure for any disputes that might arise in a charge of abuse. So that's what this is intended to address and to fill in. And it's intended to provide four principal protections in such a case. And I'll just kind of read through these. The first protection is the town's letter of intent to charge shall be sent as certified mail return receipt requested. The reason for this is so that if there is to be a dispute, that it will be identified as early as possible in the process, because the more earlier that something is identified, the more easier it is to resolve by all parties because the facts are closer in time. And when it's not sent as a letter of intent by certified mail, it is possible, for example, that the two parties do not actually know whether or not a letter has been received or sent in a particular case. All of these protections actually came out of a specific case. And in this specific case, that was an issue. So that's really why it's there. The Grinder Pump Study Committee didn't really have the wherewithal or time or information available to determine what would really be a reasonable procedure. And it has taken this 6 or 7 years for the town now to actually develop such a procedure. And that's exactly the procedure which is in this warrant article. And the first protection is just simply that one. The second one is that any, meaning all repair reports, shall be provided to the homeowner with the letter of the intent to charge. And the issue there, of course, once again, is an issue of getting all of the information regarding the repair out in the open. It turns out that in a repair of a grinder pump, there are normally actually 2 repair reports. One is referred to as the on-site repair report, and the other is normally a rebuild or the actual repair of the grinder pump. Because the way the program works, when the technicians come to the house, normally they'd simply swap out the pump that's on the premises with a rebuilt or a new pump. They take the homeowner's pump back to the shop where it's repaired. So they file an on-site report, and then they file a repair or rebuild report. And in many cases, the rebuild report can be very important because they actually take apart the pump at the site, and that can reveal very important information if there were to be an abuse, because normally an abuse results in a signature. The classic case would be disposal of an improper item. When that damages the pump, of course, it's actually left directly inside the pump. It's very easy to identify. And when this evidence is presented to a homeowner, it's undisputable. When this evidence is not presented to a homeowner, they could be confused about the situation. And it turns out that in the specific case of instance, both the 2 repair reports, that was an issue because only one was provided. If both were provided, it's just much easier to make a determination. Okay, the third is the grinder pump technician shall attend any appeal meeting at no cost to the homeowner. In many cases at the site, the technician will tell something to the homeowner in regards, it might say, for example, he might say to them, you didn't do anything wrong. Or he might say to them, oh, no, you made a mistake here. But that information isn't necessarily transmitted in the actual repair report. And when the town receives the repair report, which is sometimes incompletely or incorrectly filled out, they really were not on site. They don't have all the information needed to make an accurate determination. And also they originally weren't really so inclined to invite the grinder pump technician who actually wrote the report to be present. And that causes many homeowners to say, well, the technician told me this. And then the town really doesn't know whether that's true or not, because doesn't actually say that on the report. So this also was an issue. Technician said one thing on site, but it's not on the report. Okay, and then the last one is that the town shall not assess any charges until the conclusion of the appeal process. And this is simply to allow the initial appeal to be a information gathering process. In other words, once the town generally assesses a charge, it is in a somewhat defensive position to defend their decision, which has already been made, even though they haven't received any information from the homeowner. So all of these provisions really are designed to try to reasonably come to a determination that both parties can agree to right up front before going any further with it. So that's all for this particular slide. So next slide, please. Okay, and now the question that might arise is, why is a bylaw needed for these protections? Well, the reason for that is because as a bylaw, these protections must be approved by a majority of town meeting. That means that the town as a whole thinks they're reasonable. And a byproduct of that is, as a bylaw, these protections could only be removed by a majority of town meeting. So that's also important, because any sort of procedure is always subject to modification in the future, because circumstances change. And when they do change, the entire town meeting should be aware of the requirement or need for a change from the viewpoint of the homeowners. Okay, and as a bylaw, these protections become part. Oh yeah, it looks like I can't quite see what, oh, there we go. Of a more complete and transparent grinder pump bylaw. So what I mean by this is the current town manager policy, for example, is not put in the form of a bylaw, which is to say that it actually wouldn't apply once you go out a certain number of years. So it refers to the technician as being employed by Weston and Sampson, which they were at the time that the procedure was put in place, but that won't always be the case, which means it will need to be modified over time as circumstances change. And if it's in the grinder pump bylaw, the bylaw itself becomes more complete and transparent, which is to say, homeowners, by reading the bylaw, will be aware of exactly how it works. Various policies oftentimes are not easy to track down 20 years on. What did they say, et cetera, et cetera. I've tried obtaining some policies that are quite old, and it's not the easiest thing to do. And as a bylaw, these protections will greatly reduce any chances that future grinder pump abuse cases will result in costly court action. Nobody benefits by that type of a thing, and the expenses of the program, expenses to the town and to homeowners, will be reduced by this type of being put into the bylaw, because then it's maintained into the future. And I'll be happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions? Vicki?
I have one after Vicki.
Yes, I'm curious I'm sorry, can you hear me? It's a bit loud.
Yes, I can hear you.
I'm curious if there's any language that would cause any issues to us or to the town with anything that was retroactive or retro installed. If somebody had an issue, for instance, where when the grinder pump was installed, it was not installed deep enough due to ledge or something like that. Now the documentation is obviously with the town, but with the new verbiage and language, does that leave us, the town, liable to have to go back and resolve those issues?
You're talking about if a new construction, a new grinder pump that gets constructed? Or?
No, so an old grinder pump, what about the existing installations that had issues already that had been identified in the past? Does
Yes.
this become retroactive, and then do we have documentation protecting the town from that? So,
Well, this is a addition, or you might call it amendment to the existing grinder pump bylaw in order to add these protections, but the existing grinder pump, these protections really wouldn't relate to that, except unless a homeowner was charged for abuse of a grinder pump that happened to have been incorrectly installed. So that procedure really has been established independent of this particular warrant article. And the way that is resolved is that if a grinder pump, just to get to your example, if there was something incorrect about its original installation, that might cause a problem in the future. For example, a failure, because an incorrect installation can result in an early failure. Here, I can give you an example. The electrical cable of the grinder pump should be buried a certain depth and in a certain conduit, et cetera, but that's not always the case. So something could happen, such as the electrical cable might get chewed by a rodent, for example.
Right.
Okay, there's a classic example. Now, that would cause the grinder pump to stop working. As such, it needs repair. Now, had the grinder pump been inspected when it was originally installed, then ideally that would have been detected, because that would be one of the things that could potentially have been checked by an inspector. And the grinder pumps, as an installation of a drain to the house, do require an inspection. There's an approval process that needs to take place.
let's say that some were actually installed improperly and
Yeah.
somebody is aware and that has been brought up. I don't know if the documentation had been complete at the time, but they can certainly come out and see how it was installed and find out in the future.
If the grinder pump needs repair, the town is responsible for the repair. And it doesn't really, the bylaw does not get into what might be the purpose for that repair, failure, for example. It might or might not have been related to an improper installation. I'll give you another example. If a grinder pump is not buried to the proper depth, it might freeze in the winter, okay? It should be at a certain depth, it's below the frost line. It's immune from freezing under normal conditions. Under severe cold conditions, it could still freeze, even if it's buried to the correct frost line, because there are other conditions that apply in the winter, such as snow cover and other factors.
Right.
If it should freeze up, the town is responsible for the repair, even if it was determined that it wasn't buried to the correct depth. So that's just another example for you. This actually did come up during the grinder pump meetings. This abuse procedure did not, but improper installation was addressed.
Okay.
And it is covered by the bylaw, whether it has been improperly installed or not improperly installed.
Excellent. Thank you. That's
Okay.
exactly the issue that I was wondering about.
Okay, you're welcome.
My question, Mr. Foley, is about the requiring of the repair person to attend this hearing, but no cost to the citizen.
Yes.
Is that like an hourly amount that we're paying? I mean, what is the exposure to the town? I mean, shouldn't maybe that be split or something? I mean, if there's a contested issue, why is the town automatically picking up the tab for this person to show up and explain what's happened?
Well, there are two reasons for that. One way of explaining that is to say that particular provision has already been agreed to by the town and is part of the town manager's policy. That's one explanation.
Okay.
But the other explanation is why. What is the logic for that, and what would the actual charges be? So in the contract currently with Weston and Sampson, the last that I was aware of it, it was done at town was charged at an hourly rate. And it would depend exactly on how much time it would take the technician to travel to the town and where he happened to have been when the repair call came in. So Weston and Sampson has a technician on call at all times. They are doing routes because they service other communities, and their time is simply divided up amongst what they're doing. And it is an hourly rate. And now in this case, the grinder pump appeal meeting would be scheduled knowing the availability of both the homeowner the Department of Public Works, and the grinder pump technicians. So that would be coordinated. It would not be any sort of a surprise. But his, under the current contract, for example, his presence there would be an hourly rate, because that's just how they're paid. Now, the logic about, why should the town pick that up is because the town really wants the person who can speak to the report's accuracy, whether he needs to correct it or defend it at the appeal meeting. If he's not present to do that, and that does not really lead towards resolving the issue, and the issue becomes more expensive by actually not resolving it than by resolving it. As a practical matter, appeal hearings are extremely rare, and the actual cost is really nothing to speak of. The grinder pump program currently managed is one of the few programs which typically returns money to the town relative to their budget. Having been at town meeting and seen the budget book and the $200,000 which is allocated for the program, and the actual expenses of the program running, let's say in a particular year at $120,000, it's not. This is really small change. Just the presence of him on an occasion. Honestly, up to this point in time, I don't think it's actually ever happened, because this is not a provision, for example, that was afforded the Markhams in their particular case. I don't think the town's ever paid 1 cent for this so far, nor do I anticipate actually this being a significant expense.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, you're welcome.
Any further questions?
Do you know, I guess being fortunate enough never to have an experience with a grinder pump problem, do you know the average or typical, what's the typical replacement that a homeowner would be charged if this occurred? If it was actual abuse and it was put to the homeowner?
Okay, so typical, the mean time between failure on a grinder pump is about 8 years. So every 8 years there would be a repair. In this case, a repair that would be determined to be an abuse is extremely rare. So the town might have 60 or so calls per year, and the number that might be an abuse would be probably counted on one hand, or just a couple. I don't actually have access to that, so I only get that information through the homeowners when they contact me. So I do get an idea of it, but I don't have an exact number of it. The town, in their administration of the program, could provide that information publicly, but I'm not aware of where I would get that information. And honestly, I'm not really that interested in tracking it down or putting a lot of effort into it. I don't think it's a very big number. Now, a typical repair cost on a grinder pump, if you were to call out a repair person, would be around $600. But for the town to do it, it's more, because the town pays prevailing wage for this program. And that means that a standard repair, even if the homeowner had done it themselves, might cost them, let's just say $500. But now, with the fact that it's being done by the town, it's actually a $1,000 bill that they might be charged with if it was determined to be abuse. So I hope that helps give you the information that you asked for.
Yeah, thanks. Just one more. You mentioned, I think, is the current town policy, does allow for the technician to be at the hearing, but to your knowledge, that has never happened. Is that what you said? Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, this policy has been in place for about 1 year now, and I'm not aware of any appeal hearing that's taken place in that period of time, although it might have been.
So if there's never been an appeal under the actual policy in place that allows for such an appeal,
yeah,
why do we need a bylaw? It doesn't sound like the current process is failing in any way.
Oh no, since for the last year, the current process failed in the sense that it took a court case in order to get the current policy. That was after 5 years or 6 years of the program being in place, and so the original policy was that there was no specified policy. That didn't work from the point of view of a number of homeowners were unsatisfied with the abuse charges against them, and the most recent one took the case to court. Now, it's been in place for 1 year, and all I'm saying is I'm not aware that there's been such a meeting, but I don't think that amount of time is enough to say that no policy is needed, because there hasn't been an appeal meeting in 1 year's time.
So then it's the point of putting this forward to town meeting because
Yes.
you or the group that you're representing doesn't feel that the policy is either sufficient or would stand up to scrutiny if another case arose, so you want to make this an actual bylaw?
No. The bylaw is actually exactly the terms of that policy written in the form of a bylaw. We completely agree with the policy that currently exists because we were a party in negotiating it along with the town. Both the town and the Sewer Fairness Alliance, the homeowners, both agree with that particular policy. The only point here is to making that policy part of the bylaw so that it will be maintained, let's say, in 20 years' time. So in 20 years' time, God willing, I might still be here, but I know for sure that my grinder pumps will still be here. Okay, so I'm not looking forward like 1 or 2 years and saying, oh, this will be fine for the next year or two. I'm looking for something in the bylaw that will outlast my participation in this particular effort. Just as the regular grinder pump bylaw currently does, but this particular provision.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Any further questions? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Foley, for being here this evening.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
All right, next on our agenda this evening, we have a review of the fiscal year 22 budget for the police department. With us this evening is Chief James Finney. And I'm going to start your presentation here. Thank you for joining.
Either way, Mr. Chairman, I could do it or you could do it, that's fine.
Which would you prefer?
Well, let me give it a shot.
All right.
Do I have share capability?
I'm going to give it to you right now.
Okay. Members of the committee, good evening. For the committee's benefit and the benefit of the community, I have a brief presentation, just some of the things we're working on here at the police department, and a quick breakdown of our personnel, as well as obviously FY22 budget. I'm all set, Mr. Chairman, to give it a shot.
You're all set. You should have the ability to share right now.
Okay. Okay. All right. So again, good evening, everyone. Going to start with our goals and objectives for the upcoming year. Apply community policing strategies and initiatives to prevent crime and focus on quality of life concerns. Build on the police department wellness division. Just for the committee's information, last summer we established a brand new division within the police department that'll strictly focus on mental health, substance abuse concerns, as well as outreach and diversity issues in town. So as you're aware, I've presented before, we have been dealing quite a bit with our opiate issues and mental health issues, but this is the first time we've actually created a standalone division. And when we go into the personnel section, you'll see how that's broken down. But we created a division to exclusively deal with these issues in a proactive manner. So we're excited about that moving forward. And that obviously includes the Clinician Outreach, which is continuing to expand. We now have 2 clinicians that are available to Chelmsford on a 24/7 basis. 3, enhanced traffic-related programs to minimize motor vehicle violations, reduce accidents, facilitate traffic flow, and enhance pedestrian and bicycle safety, and build on the established traffic and safety unit. So last July, I implemented a full-time traffic and safety unit within the Special Services Division. How this is different from years prior. Before, the traffic officers that focused on traffic would very often be absorbed into the day shift complement to handle the patrol sector. So with some rearranging of personnel and with some additional hiring we did 2 years ago, I now have 2 officers Monday through Friday that are focusing exclusively on traffic and safety issues in town, whether it's speeding or working with the traffic and safety committee made up of myself, the fire chief, the town manager, assistant town manager, DPW director, and so on. They work on those things, and they're left alone to do that. So that's going to continue to be utilized moving forward. Continue to work closely with the school department, fostering partnerships and continued progress with the assigned school resource officers. As everyone should be aware, we now have 3 full-time school officers. And even in the light of the pandemic, and the hybrid school scenarios we've been dealing with, they've been busy. The school resource officers have been responding to households all across town all year long with various issues involving students. So they continue to work hand in hand with the school department. Increased usage of social media outlets to inform the public of issues, receive feedback, problem areas in town. In addition to Twitter and Facebook, we have added Tips 411. That's a social media platform where the public can have direct anonymous access to the police department to report anything from a crime in progress to a parking problem. So we're going to continue to work on that. And ensure all Chelmsford Police Department policies and procedures reflect the Massachusetts police reform legislation that was passed at the end of last year and takes effect at various points this year. Since the Chelmsford Police Department is an accredited law enforcement agency, and we've been accredited now for about a decade, we're 2/3 there, I'm proud to say. Almost all the things that need to be implemented, we're already doing, and we have been doing them for a number of years. However, as a result of the new reform law, there are some changes to use of force, policies and procedures, as well as SRO directives and MOUs that have to be changed, amongst some other things. So that's a priority this year to get it right, and I have no doubt that we will. Quick department personnel review. It stayed the same last year, except for we have one animal control officer now. We had 2 last year. That's a result of a retirement. And in light of the pandemic and all the departments doing their best to kind of streamline things, we've reduced to 1 animal control officer. So obviously 1 chief, 1 deputy, 7 lieutenants, 8 sergeants, 37 patrol officers, 9 public safety dispatchers, 3 clerical support personnel, 1 facility maintenance employee, and 1 fleet mechanic. Here's the police department personnel broken down by division. Again, our complement is not increased. Administrative division, myself and the deputy chief. The investigative division, made up of 1 lieutenant, 1 sergeant, and 4 detectives. The special services division, 1 lieutenant, 2 full-time traffic officers, and a sergeant at court. He's our liaison to the Lowell District Court. The wellness division I haven't read because it's brand new. That's overseen by 1 lieutenant, and we moved the school resource officers under him. We just thought it was a better fit. When there's no school, he can use these officers to facilitate some of the things that need to be addressed as far as whether it's a diversity, a mental health issue, or a substance abuse issue. They'll be at his disposal. Patrol division, 38 personnel made up of 4 shift commanders at the rank of lieutenant, 28 patrol officers, and 6 sergeants that act as patrol supervisor on the street. This is just a organizational chart. I apologize for the small font. I continue to work on this. I'll probably be retired before I can figure it out. But in any event, if you look at it, the left-hand side is really operational. You have your lieutenant of the investigative division, followed by the sergeant and detectives. You have lieutenants that oversee each patrol shift, followed underneath by the sergeant, who again is the patrol supervisor. He's the foreman on the street, the first supervisor on scene, and the patrol officers that handle the calls of service. On the right-hand side of the screen is really all your administrative support function: vehicle maintenance, custodial, admin, animal control, public safety, dispatch, traffic officers falling underneath special services. And again, the community wellness division is brand new over on the far right. Underneath him, again, is the school resource officers. So to start a snapshot of the upcoming FY22 budget, this first slide represents personnel costs. So I have here first listed last year's costs, FY21, at $6,644,211. My proposal for FY22 will be $6,738,183. It's an increase of $93,972, or 1.4%. The drivers of those numbers, in addition to obviously all the collective bargaining agreements that are in place, are the cost of living adjustment for non-using personnel, step increases for clerical personnel, and step increases for eligible patrol officers that are still in the step system. Additional overtime drivers, shift replacement, and staff education requirements. And on this next slide, I wanted to break down some of those requirements because it's expansive and it's ongoing and it's becoming more and more important. And because it is expanding, it's becoming more and more expensive. I'm going to go through these because they are important. Dealing with emotionally, and again, the officers go through most of these trainings annually. And in some of the cases, they're 40-hour courses. These are not 4-hour blocks, a quick hit. Some of these are very extensive trainings, and as a result of that, the officers have to be off shift to participate in them, which requires their shift to be replaced by another officer on overtime. So dealing with emotionally disturbed persons, crisis intervention training, de-escalation training, tactical training with our less than lethal safety systems, update and use of force training, which is going to be mandated for this year with the new reform law, implicit bias training, interacting with people with interacting with special populations. This is referring to autistic individuals, LGBTQ community, all fostering positive relationship building with these groups. Substance use disorder training and officer wellness training. I'm sad to say that last year more police officers took their life than were killed in the line of duty. So officer wellness is becoming more and more of a priority. It's something police departments need to embrace and really encourage the officers to participate in this training so everyone can see the warning signs if somebody's in any type of crisis. This is a police department expense summary. FY21, my expenses were $754,000. For upcoming FY22, the proposal is for $824,500. This is an increase in $57,000 or 9.3%. And on the next slide, I have a breakdown of some of the drivers of the expense. So we actually are having a decrease in electricity costs of $5,000. We have a decrease in our telephone costs of $12,500. A decrease in fuel costs by $5,600. I'm asking for an increase in contracted services, $7,000. An increase in new equipment, $10,000. An increase in computer maintenance, $10,000. And an increase in replacement vehicles, $65,000. So let me back up for a minute. So contracted services, we have a number of systems now and programs in the police department that are all cloud-based, and they're supplied by vendors. These vendors maintain these sites for us. Our policies and procedures are now cloud-based. Our TIPS 411 is a cloud-based system. Our BOLO app, that's another social media platform, is a cloud-based system. And my media assistant that helps me with press release is also a reoccurring cost to have him assist us, especially in major events that require, press releases of a significant nature. So that's the increase in contracted services. New equipment, again, the computers have continued to increase in costs, et cetera. The replacement costs for the equipment within the PD continue to rise. So that's one of the reasons for new equipment. Also, medical supplies and ammunition continues to increase. So that's an unfortunate reality. That's the request. And $10,000 for computer maintenance. The reason for that is we now have e-citation across most of the cruiser fleet. And for what that is, the people that don't know, is now the citation, instead of being handwritten by the police officer, is now printed by a little mini printer within the cruiser. So it's a much more professional, neat look. It also is direct communication with the RMV. As soon as the officer presses the enter button on the citation, the Registry of Motor Vehicles is notified of the citation. So it streamlines the whole process. I just am assuming the maintenance on those devices is going to be significant, especially with their mobile devices. So that's the request for $10,000 on that line item. And replacement vehicles, $65,000. Last year, as you recall, I dropped my cruiser replacement vehicles down to 3. That became $135,000. That was based on the assessment of each unit costing $45,000, and then we only dropped it down to 3. This year, I'm requesting back to 4, brand new police vehicles at an estimation of roughly $50,000 each. The cruisers themselves run about $37,000. These are hybrid units. These are green vehicles. but the unit costs are right around 37,000. And when you get done adding in the equipment for each unit, the prisoner transport equipment, the emergency lighting, the communication equipment, the computer terminals. When you add all that up, it comes out to be roughly $15,000 per car. So we're roughly spending about $50,000 a cruiser now, brand new. And my concern is if we don't get back to the point of 4 a year, it would adversely affect the fleet. I mean, these are important pieces of equipment. They play a vital role in officer safety and, competent communication, et cetera. So these pieces of equipment have to be replaced every year. So I don't want to see us fall behind by dropping down only 3 units a year, like this, to get back to 4. So that's the reason for that increase. So the total budget increase for FY22 is $164,472, or 2.2%. That's total increase from FY21. This is obviously Form 2. It's a full breakdown of all personnel services with different costs, et cetera, based on collective bargaining, longevity, et cetera. After I get through, if there's something you'd like me to go back on, please let me know. I can certainly arrow back up. Again, a full breakdown of the expenses, and I have the little squares around some of those items that I already discussed. Again, computer maintenance, the increase, new equipment, and the replacement vehicles is really the main drivers. They're the main difference from last year. Everything else is pretty much the same. Obviously, animal control falls under the police department. FY22 was roughly half of last year because we only have 1 animal control officer now. So as you can see, the bottom line, we go from 113,000 to 52,005. Animal control expenses are basically the same except for fuel. We only expect fuel to be half of what it was last year because the vehicle is only going to be running half amount of time as it was last year. So total FY22 budget is really cut in half from last year at $60,089. Before I get into any statistical data, does anybody have any questions about FY22 proposal?
Yeah, my question is simply, back on the animal control, is 1 person enough? Yes,
one is really always been sufficient, but we were presented with an interesting situation several years ago. The animal control officer was out for an extended period for personal reasons, so we brought in another individual to replace him, and he was replaced for quite some time. He was a fantastic employee. He is a fantastic employee. It's ACO Mark Cianci. He's done a fantastic job. We had an uptick in calls during the evening hours as it was. So I made the request to the town manager that because this individual had worked out so well, we were getting some evening issues. And we also foresaw that the current employee complement would most likely reduce in the near future. That's just something we were very confident of. So I made the request that we keep ACO Cianci on. He was able to fill a gap during the evening. I feel very confident with his work ethic going down to 1. The community will be fine. He has on-call hours. We also have an agreement with the surrounding towns that if our animal control is not available and there is an emergency, they come out for us. We do the same thing for them. We actually let Kingsborough use our animal control officer for a matter of about a month and a half over the fall. ACO Cianci is also available to come out really 24/7 when we need him on an on-call basis. So to answer your question, yes, I feel confident 1 is fine. Okay. I like to do a little snapshot of some of our calls, police activity each year. This is only a very small amount. We have over 300 action codes that we use every year. I just try to put some of the ones here that I think the committee would appreciate and the community would. Obviously, the pandemic has had an enormous effect on our calls last year. Proactivity levels were impacted. People calling the police for different things were impacted. Chief Ryan, I'm sure, will articulate in his presentation. We saw a significant drop in medical calls because people didn't call. They were afraid to go to the hospital and whatnot. So a lot of these numbers are direct impact from the pandemic. The overall police activity held about the same. It was right around 36,000 last year, 36,979. I'm sorry, in 19, and 36,979, and that's calendar year 20. So very little difference in actual total calls. Our arrests were down significantly. We only had 169 arrests in 2020 calendar. That was down 32%. Our citations were almost cut in half from what they normally are to 1,324. Motor vehicle stops were down about 30%, 4,558. Motor vehicle accidents, and on a positive note, were down 30%. Our medical calls were down 34%, 2,558. Our residential and commercial alarms were down 23% at 1,049. Our disturbance type incidents were up significantly. They were up 22%. We had 505 disturbances. We actually had fights at our plazas. I really can't recall a year where we actually had reports of open fighting in public parking lots. And obviously, you can look at it however you want, but the pandemic played into a lot of frustration levels across many communities, and Chelmsford was not immune. Domestic disturbances were down 4%. However, I don't have it listed here, but our domestic batteries were up. So while we went to fewer domestics, more of them involved people being, a battery taking place. So our B&Es to residents in commercial properties were up. We had 24 last year, and that's referring to unoccupied structures. These did not involve homes where people were home at the time. Robberies were down 33%. We had 2, and that involved our bank teller type of facilities. I think people probably remember reading in the paper, there was a subject on a motorcycle that held up another number of banks in the region. He was apprehended, but that's what the robberies were in town. It was involving our banks. Vandalisms were up slightly. We had 85 typical, mailbox smashing type of events. Motor vehicle breaks held about even at 35 in most cases. Keys have been left in the car. I'm sorry, that's motor vehicle thefts. The motor vehicle breaks, again, petty theft type of things, people leaving valuables in their vehicles in view, which you should never do. Cell phones, wallets, that type of thing. Motor vehicle thefts were up 23%. We had 21. A number of these did involve vehicles that were leased or rented, and they were not returned on time. A handful, though, did involve vehicles being stolen out of the driveway of residences. So we did have a handful of those. And unfortunately, in most of them, the keys were left in the car, which, as we all know, is never a good idea. But the drivers of that number being that high, we had a number of rental vehicles that were not returned on time. So eventually they do get entered as a stolen motor vehicle. I'm happy to say that our opioid overdoses were down. We had 29. And unfortunately, 3 of those were fatal. But the numbers are overall down. I think there's a couple things in play there. I think some of our initiatives are taking hold and having a positive impact. And because of the pandemic, more people were home, so people were less likely to be left alone and overdose. So I think that was a factor in that as well. Fraud is unprecedented levels. We had 664 incidents of fraud last year. That's up 290%, and we're probably all familiar with why. The unemployment fraud was through the roof, really across the country, and Massachusetts got hit particularly hard. There was also a lot of fraud revolving around personal protective equipment, where people were being scammed into thinking they were actually ordering masks and other protective devices, and it was fraudulent, and they lost their money and they never received any equipment. And then the last thing I have is foot patrols and property checks. That was up 37%. The officers did 17,989 of these checks. A lot of reasons for this. Early on in the pandemic, because of people not adhering to some of the social distancing restrictions put in place by the governor, this was occurring on town property. We had a number of complaints of large gatherings on town property that required the officers to make extra checks and do foot patrols to keep the areas clear and keep everybody healthy. So that's my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions if you have it.
The citation number, is that inclusive of anything that a citation be written for? So vehicle through public, I mean, is that any and all citations?
That would be any and all motor vehicle citations. So that would not be a citation for, like, a summons. That summons falls under a criminal action.
Okay, so those are all vehicle, yeah.
So that would be whether it was a warning or a civil citation involving in a monetary fine, that would be under citations.
Is there anything that stood out as why that decreased considerably more than like the vehicle stops?
Well, typically citations run about a third of all motor vehicle stops because many instances the officers give people verbal warnings. And, that started being the trend really a number of years ago, where they want motor vehicle stops to be a positive interaction with the public. And if you can accomplish your goal by having a professional conversation with someone and telling them what they did wrong and why they were stopped, and everybody, parts ways learning something and feeling that they were treated with respect and in a professional manner and really without being necessarily fined, that's a win for everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Any other questions? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Chief, for being here this evening.
Thank you.
All right, moving right along, we have a review of the fiscal year 22 budget of the fire department. With us this evening is Chief Gary Ryan. Chief, how are you?
Mr. Clancy, how are we doing today? I hope everybody's well.
Thank you.
Would you share the screen if you could?
Yeah, 1 second, please.
Thank you.
All right, you should have the ability to share now.
Okay. Can you see that?
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, committee members. Good evening, Town Manager, Finance Director John Souza, and of course my Public Safety Partner, Chief Spinney. So currently the budget I'm working with, I currently have 60 uniform members. One position remains vacant. You may recall, I know Chief Spinney brought this up, due to the pandemic budget cuts last year, I elected to leave one position vacant to comply with the 5% budget cut. With that said, I am seeking to restore, in fiscal 22, restore all vacant firefighter positions. But with that said, this is going to be a challenging year. We are projected to lose 4 of our members this year, 1 at disability retirement, and 3 firefighters will reach the mandatory retirement age of 65. And before I proceed, if anybody has questions, please just jump in or ask me questions. So for fiscal 22, after sitting down with the town manager, finance director John Souza, I am proposing a fiscal 22 budget of $6,685,794. On the personnel side, that's $6,245,294. In expenses, like Chief Spinney, my expenses have gone up significantly, $440,500, over 7.5%, for a total budget increase of 2.5%, over 2.5%. What that will do will bring my existing staffing levels back up to 63.5, which is 61 uniform members and 2.5 staff. We're going to have my organizational chart when everybody is on board. We will have 52 firefighters assigned across 4 groups or units, as we call them. Each will be managed by a company officer. We have 2 captains in the fire prevention office and 1 in training. Talking about the drivers for our expenses, from fiscal 15 to fiscal 20, over the last 5 years, our vehicle maintenance line item has risen significantly by 231%. As you can see in fiscal 15, our vehicle maintenance was only $47,779. Last year, we spent $158,000. Significant increase. This year, we're on pace to exceed that. As of March 12th, we're at $114,000 for a budget line item of $90,000. So what's driving these costs? We have what is known in several of our engines, max force diesel engines. These are well-known problematic engine issues in the industries. In fact, these engines aren't being built anymore. These engines have been subject to 47 lawsuits, class action lawsuits, including the Boston Fire Department going back to 2016. And I included some links if you want to check on those. And recently, I believe a judge has agreed to a settlement regarding this issue. But for the Chelmsford Fire Department, we have this motor, the max diesel force engine, in several of our frontline pieces. Engine 3 has it, 4 has it, and engine 5 has it, as well as the rescue. I think the only silver lining I see here is that we are projected in the next couple of years to move on from these pieces. But not all of our maintenance issues are as a result of the max force diesel engine. As you can see at the bottom, the ladder, I had to replace the hydraulic pump, which helps to raise the actual operation of the ladder. That cost close to $9,000. In addition, some of our newer engines, which do not have the max force diesel engine, have very expensive components, electrical parts. The plus side of that is it helps us diagnose what the issue is for the engine, but once you find out what the issue is, it's very expensive to break it apart, to replace, and to put back into service. Again, if you have any questions, please jump right in. Kind of my public service announcement, civil service, the state civil service department is going to be implementing some changes this year. So anybody who is interested in getting on the fire department, not only just the Chelmsford Fire Department, excuse me, the firefighter entry-level test has been moved from its traditional spring date for March to October. So that will make the new eligibility list, which is the list that the municipalities hire off of, available in March 15th. In fact, we just got our new list this past week. But perhaps the biggest change, and for the first time, civil service is offering an annual retake option. For those candidates who aren't satisfied with their score, they will have an option, an opportunity to retake the exam and then have that new score, if they like, merged and reconciled into the following list next year. And the list is generally good for 2 years. Taking a look at our engine locations. Engine 1 is going on 7 years. It's hard to believe. We've been here 7 years. Engine 2 up north at 35 Princeton Street, 65 years old, but that is currently underway, that project. And we are projected to complete that in October. Engine 3 is over in West Chelmsford, it's 51 years old. Engine 4 at 45 is over in East. And Engine 5 down south Chelmsford, 295 Acton Road, is 55 years old, but that is our second oldest station. Looking at our staffing configuration, this is if everybody is in, nobody's out on injury or out on vacation. We could have in the center a captain managing 4 firefighters, up in Engine 2, which is North Chelmsford, 3 firefighters. That's the only substation with more than 2 firefighters. Engine 3 at West, 4 in East, and 5 in South have 2 firefighters. As I mentioned before, when you operate out of 5 stations, again, it's not just 5 stations. We have a maintenance garage over the Murchison Road. In addition, we have a garage behind Engine 4. So it's actually 7 buildings. You can see that energy costs are a significant part of our expense budget. And I've said this before, it's very expensive to heat fire stations because of constant opening and closing of garage doors, as well as cool the stations in the summer. If you look at the energy consumption, even though Engine 1, the fire headquarters, is the largest station, it is the most efficient station. Not only is it the most efficient station, it's also the most efficient public building. And if you look at Engine 2, hopefully we're going to be able to replicate that energy efficiency when we're completed. You look at Engine 3 and 5, two smaller stations, not very energy efficient. And this will be interesting because you're probably aware of the Mass State Legislature is looking to enact a bill, a net zero carbon emissions bill by 2050. But there are certain benchmarks communities, if I understand it correct, will have to meet in the next few years. So I would think not only the fire department, but other public buildings have an opportunity to increase their energy efficiency levels. With that said, looking at the town, I know it's a little hard to see, but if you look at that red vertical line, to the right of that are the least energy efficient buildings in town. To the left are the most energy efficient. So you look to the right, you see our fire stations. You see Engines 2, 3, and 4. But to the far left, on the energy efficient side, you also have the fire headquarters. Again, it's my hope that when you complete Engine 2, I think we're going to bump over to the other side. Taking a look at our responses, no surprises here. I know Chief Spenny talked about several of his calls have gone down, and that is the same with the Chelmsford Fire Department. With businesses closed, restaurants shutting down, people working remote, you had less traffic. But for us, starting at the top of structure fires, even though we had less structure fires than we did the previous year, sadly, one of those fires involved the loss of a 58-year-old woman at the Kinlock Apartments on May 1st over at 104 Turnpike Road. Within weeks of that fire, we had another fire over at the Chelmsford Mobile Trailer Park, and both fires were attributed to smoking materials. It was a very bad year for fires with smoking materials on the state level. Unauthorized burning, I think people were home. That went up quite a bit. I think people were doing yard chores. Motor vehicle accidents, like Chief Spinney said, we had less cars on the road, people working remote, so those were down significantly. Alarm activations were down. Investigation calls were up slightly. Mutual aid responses were down slightly. We went to Lowell 6 times, Westford 6, Barickett 5, and Tingsboro 2. Taking a look at our 2020 engine responses, you may recall back in 2019, Criterion Associates was hired to do an analysis of the Chelmsford Fire Department. And when they presented in 2019, they looked at 3.5 years of our responses. And what they found is that Engine 1 in the center, 2 up north, and 3 over in west were the busiest stations. And you can see that 2020 continues that trend. The outlier here is Engine 4. Engine 4 always exceeds Engine 5 for responses and for call volume. However, Engine 4 was impacted due to quarantine issues, due to COVID, and also we had some apparatus issues, maintenance issues, which required the station to be closed on occasion. Speaking of COVID and its impact on the fire department, from March of last year through Thanksgiving, we only had 2 members receive positive test results. We did fantastic. And that is largely, I think, a result of the policies, the safeguards that we put in place. Also, the fact that our members work together to address safety issues as they happen. And I can't thank our members for working together to address these issues. Then Thanksgiving happened. From Thanksgiving to January of this year, 12 members, 2 staff became positive. The fire department actually reflected the community spread that not only you saw in the town of Chelmsford, but also throughout the state. From March of last year through January, we had 243 shifts were used to quarantine the members of the department. So certainly this had an impact on my budget. 49 members have received their COVID vaccinations. I'm sure you've probably seen the stories in the Boston Globe. They're asking people, people running for the governor's office about their positions and mandatory vaccinations. Talk about state troopers and Department of Corrections. So very happy to see that number as high as it is. COVID vaccination training. 24 of our members, along with 9 police officers, took training provided by Lowell General and the Lowell General paramedics to provide this life safety training. So I am thankful to Lowell General, their paramedics, And also, it was a fantastic opportunity. We've used these skills in our local clinics. That Director Sue Roser and her fantastic team have done a fantastic job of carrying out, organizing effective vaccination clinics. And it's a shame that we can't continue providing that life-saving service here in town. Speaking of COVID, sadly, we lost from April last year, during the height of the pandemic, through January, we lost 91 victims to COVID. At the height of the pandemic, we lost 31 in April. And then you see that second surge in the fall. Things start to pick up from the fall and into winter. This data that you see here is current as of January 6th. Substantially, most of the COVID victims were female. And sadly, at the height of the pandemic, back in April, Paul Manor lost one of their staff members, female, age 69. This red box here you see up top to the left is a Gamewell Master Box. It's actually a telegraph fire alarm system that was developed in Boston in the 1850s. You see this Gamewell box on all the school buildings, the public buildings, and most of the commercial buildings in town. And in fact, the Gamewell Company was formed after the Civil War and put this into operation. The way this system works, if you have a detector or alarm activation, it will send a signal to your internal fire alarm panel. Then it will send a signal from the panel to this red box. It's a telegraph box. You can see the tapping mechanisms below. It will actually tap out a code. Each building has a specific code. They'll tap a code out, sends it by a red cable along the telephone poles to all the five fire stations in the 911 dispatch center. Chelmsford began installing this system back in the 1920s. And at its peak, we had over 300 boxes on buildings, closer to 400, and we had 245 street boxes. So when you drive through your neighborhood, sometimes you'll see one of these boxes on a pedestal. But due to age, due to reliability concerns, we started the process back in July of 2019 to convert over to what is known as a central station system. The individual businesses, the public buildings actually run their own system, goes to a call center. And our last conversion just happened back in December of 20. So I want to take the time to thank everybody, to thank our businesses, the business community, and everybody for working together to kind of make this change that we asked of them. As far as permits, the town has signed on with full circle technology, or Permitize. The Chelmsford Fire Department was supposed to go live with this permit system last June. But because of the shutdown back in March, we actually had to jump into the system a little bit early, and we had to build it out. From March of last year to March of this year, so we've been on it for a year, we've issued over 1,700 permits, and again, trying to build this system out. We offer permits over 19 different categories. We also took the opportunity to actually look at our permit offerings, and we've actually consolidated 1,500 permits that were issued by our public safety dispatchers. We were able to absorb them into existing fire alarm permits. We've issued over 594 smoke carbon monoxide certificates. What that is, if you're selling your home, the fire department has to conduct an inspection and issue you a certificate for your closing. That is significant, considering that the governor's executive orders shut down those inspections for 3 to 4 months. So my fire prevention staff did a fantastic job when things open up, going out and conducting these inspections. We've issued over 800 fire protection system permits and 14 energy storage system permits. With the changes that you're going to see coming down from the federal and state level for the energy code requirements, you're going to see an increase in home energy permits. The fire department is responsible for permitting anything over 20 kilowatts. So for us, what is a common system is, you might have heard of the Tesla wall systems, the power systems. So I think you'll see an increase in energy storage systems soon. We've also issued over 500 open burning permits as of March 22nd. We've picked up over 50,000 fees. However, we waived over 7,000 fees. And the reason for that is the Gamewell Master Box issue, we required that change. Businesses had to pull a permit, but we waived them. That was a change that we required. In addition, not only the fire department, but the town, in general worked with industries, with restaurants in particular, to do inspections, to try to get them back open for the pandemic. So we waived our inspection fees for tents and restaurants to try to work with our business partners to get them open. And again, that is not just the fire department, other departments did the same. Looking at our staff vehicle inventory, we received a favorable recommendation in the fall capital meeting to get a new staff vehicle and also a new mechanic's truck. So we will be looking to move on from our plow backup truck, the 2002 that you see at the bottom. Also, we'll be looking to move on from the 2005 Ford Explorer, which is a former police vehicle, which has over 100,000 miles on it. Finally, our apparatus, as you can see to the column to the right, I discussed before, we are going to be looking to move on from several pieces over the next few years. They're going to hit the replacement schedule age of 15. So if we keep on schedule, we'll be looking to move on from the rescue, engine 3, engine 5, the brush truck, and also we'll be retiring a piece probably around 23 or 24 due to the age being 25 years old. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Are there any questions? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Chief, for being here this evening and presenting.
Thank you. Thank you. Good night, everybody.
All right, next on our agenda, we're following up on a few of the warrant articles for the zoning bylaw amendments, and then there's a general bylaw amendment at the end, although that, as we know, is just a follow-up if the other bylaw amendments are voted through in town meeting. And so with us this evening, again, we have the Community Development Director, Evan Belansky, and we also have members of the Planning Board here this evening as well. I see Mike Racebeck and Nancy Arroway here again this evening. So thank you for being here again.
Thank you and good evening. Jim, if you could bring up the updated PowerPoint.
I will do that. One second.
Thank you. So as Jim is doing that, last night the Planning Board did close their public hearing and did vote their recommendations for each of the 4 zoning related articles. So when I go through the slides, I will primarily highlight the new additions as it pertains to Article 37, based upon FinCom update, bullet number 3, hopefully reflects, or more accurately or clearly reflects, the intent of this amendment to increase the parking to 80% of requirement from the existing 50% requirement. That make more sense?
It does. Thank you, Evan.
Okay. This article has been endorsed by the Center Village Master Planning Committee, and last evening the Planning Board voted to recommend approval, a vote of 7 in favor.
All right. Any questions on Article 37? I think that answered most of our questions. I think the only thing we had outstanding was just to clarify and then the vote on that. All right, moving along to Article 38.
Okay, on 38, I do not believe there were any updates on the first slide. I did clarify the first bullet based upon some Planning Board discussion. This is not recommended, but it's identified in the 2020 Master Plan update.
Got it. I believe it's the same pictures from that.
The same, correct. So based upon FinCom discussion, I've identified examples of Massachusetts, so or close by in Massachusetts. So the first one speaks directly to Amazon, and the reason I keep mentioning Amazon is that it's the most prominent and prevalent, not only to the resident or consumer, but in the marketplace. And in Massachusetts, their full-scale fulfillment centers range from a small of 26,000 in a very urban environment, upwards of 1 million square feet. I'll discuss this a bit further as it pertains to Chelmsford, particularly in the IA zoning district. The next one speaks specifically to Stop and Shop. This is closer to home as we have a Stop and Shop in town. They have, down in Brockton, they have completely closed what was once a traditional retail and have reopened it as a online fulfillment center. Next example is also Stop and Shop. This one happens to be in Whitman, Mass, where they are operating a dark store. This dark store was a former, retail facility operated by Stop and Shop. The fourth one relates to Walmart. Again, we have a Walmart in Chelmsford, and up in Salem, New Hampshire. They had a pilot program that they started a couple of years ago, converting existing retail square footage into a 20,000 square foot micro fulfillment center. And they have since decided to move that model to a national platform. Chairman Clancy mentioned Bertucci's. I was not aware that the Bertucci's in Chelmsford is actually in the process, if they haven't already, partnered with Guy Fieri as well as Mr. Beastburger. So those are real world examples of ghost kitchens, virtual kitchens, finding partnerships with existing restaurants, and it's happening in Chelmsford as we speak. Next slide, please. This slide I updated based upon FinCom input, the 4 zoom-ins and identifying what parts of town these zoom-ins are applicable to. Hopefully that gives not only FinCom, but as we move towards town meeting and at town meeting, a better idea as to where these zoned opportunities exist. I had mentioned last week that the highlighted N on the upper right CD accessory use, that was a placeholder. At last night's planning board meeting, the planning board did formally vote to amend the printed warrant. In the printed warrant, that was a PB for accessory use in the CD zoning district. That change was primarily based upon direct input received from the Vinyl Square Strategic Action Plan Committee. The Chairman Joe Tierney did speak at last night's planning board meeting. So as I mentioned, the planning board vote did include an amendment to change it from the warrant, which is a PB, to an N, which would be prohibited. They also, and I sent, Jim, I also sent you the revised warrant text that reflects these 2 changes. The second change that the planning board voted to recommend was to put an asterisk or a footnote next to fulfillment center accessory use, and to add a footnote to the existing use table that would indicate that accessory fulfillment centers would be permitted in the CD zoning district along Chelmsford Street. So this is speaking to the bottom left square, as well as the bottom right square. That dark pink color is the CD zoning district along Chelmsford Street, down Fletcher into Town Meeting House Road, that the planning board is recommending via a footnote to allow accessory fulfillment centers in that particular CD zoning district.
Evan, could I ask
Yes.
a question? Could you just, for clarification, could you just lightly touch on what CA, CB, CC, you know, what do those little codes actually stand for in words, just so that make sure everybody knows what we're talking about here?
Yeah, so CA is neighborhood commercial. That is best characterized as across from the Westlands. It's small scale, neighborhood scale commercial uses. Many of them are converted houses. CB is roadside commercial. That is along Littleton Road, portions of Tingsboro Road. CC is shopping center. That's primarily located Drum Hill, where the Walmart Plaza is. Chelmsford Street at the lower line, where our other big boxes are, as well as adjacent to Center Village, where the Andiamo's Nobo's Plaza is located. CD is general commercial. That is highlighted in the dark pink. CD, again, is located in Vinyl Square, the gateways to Vinyl Square, Chelmsford Street, and a couple small isolated districts as well. Center Village, CV, is located in Center Village, downtown Chelmsford. And IA Limited Industrial is the gray colored map, gray colored zoning districts. There's a portion located up in the northern part of Tingsboro Road, off of Watton Street, and where Lighthouse School is, outside of Vinyl Square. Portions of Middlesex Street as you leave Vinyl Square. One of the mills in North is zoned limited industrial.
In that little swath by Byam.
By Byam.
But Maple Ave, right in by Byam is a little gray.
Yes.
By the rail trail.
Yes, in the South Chelmsford Village.
Can you just repeat? We said CC was where, or CB and CC? Where were those again?
CB is the green color, Littleton Road. Portions of Tingsboro Road, portions of Middlesex Street, portions of Princeton Street, portions of Drum Hill.
And CC, which one was the one that did you mention something about Andiamo's, Nobo's Plaza? What was that? I just want to make sure I understood.
That is CC, shopping center.
Okay, that's not Center Village. Okay.
Correct. It's not Center Village.
Center Village is the blue, the periwinkle blue.
Now, I wanted to ask a question about the 110 from the center of town to 495. So that would include what used to be the CVS right beside Papagino's?
Correct.
So just to kind of talk this through, so we have that building which is empty. I don't know if there's been any action on it or anything. You could tell us if you knew. So that building is basically, to me, it's just a flat building. It would be something that if I were to stockpile things in and send out, just use for distribution, it seems like it would be suited. So that would, I think, be a little bit of an issue with traffic coming and going if you had, I don't know, it was the distribution center. So, I mean, based on what you said, that would be, that property would qualify, and the building that used to have a florist there on the corner of
Wilson.
Thank you. So that building would qualify for some of these things as well.
So those two examples would only qualify for the accessory fulfillment, and as defined, accessory means no more than 30% of the total gross square footage. So the former CVS, which is now a vacant Med Express, I think that's, let's assume it's 10,000 square feet. It's slightly less than that, I believe. So no more than 3,000 gross square feet could be used for accessory fulfillment. So it's still required.
We assume, though, right? We assume that the planning board sticks to the zoning as presented. It doesn't give, take into consideration and give a permit, even though it's above certain percentages and stuff like that. Kind of like what was going on with the center beforehand with that building.
The center, everything you're referring to is within zoning overlays. What's being proposed is outside of zoning overlays.
So these are the rules, and there can't be any special permit issued that would allow for anything over what is in the bylaw. I just want to make sure I'm fully clear, because I think a lot of people get upset when we think something's come in, we've voted for something, and there's an unintended consequence of that. So I just want to make sure I fully understand.
So the planning board could have included a blanket special permit provision to increase any or all of these. That is not included in the proposal. In fact, when it came into accessory use, my initial draft had it at no greater than 50%, and the planning board ratcheted down to 30%. And their rationale was that they wanted to keep our retail districts primarily retail. So that's why the accessory is defined as no more than 30% of the gross tenant square footage. The strategic intent is to keep our strong retail districts, but allow an accessory component where a business feels as though that is beneficial to them to convert up to 30%. The only way that the 30% could be increased is with a dimensional variance from the zoning board.
So
what's can you explain what a dimensional variance from the zoning board is?
Yeah, so
sorry, Kathy.
A variance is the highest threshold. It's the most difficult form of zoning relief to obtain from the zoning board. It requires the proponent to prove a hardship related to the land, the topography. It has to be a very unique situation. At face value, 99% of variances do not meet the legal standard. And if you've been following the Chelmsford Zoning Board, they are very, very strict in their interpretation in granting variances.
So, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
As I look at this, IA, which is the gray dots, which we already established as the the gray, and that there is a section at the Byam School area that is IA, and there are large buildings over there that are being used for office space now that should things change, could be changed to be a fulfillment center, because it says principal use, yes. It could have dark stores and ghost kitchens. I see, I see that area, that Byam IA area, as problematic to have. Well, I don't care about the ghost kitchen, but just about everything else I think would be problematic in that area because of being located near the school, near the rail trail. I just don't think that's a good location for any of this stuff to be happening.
I'm just going to step in. Are we asking a question here? Or
well, I kind of am. IA is, yes, I am asking. Okay. IA seems to be all of these things. All of these potential changes could happen in zone IA, right?
Correct. If I can proceed with the PowerPoint and the updates, it will likely answer some of your concerns.
Yeah. Actually, before we do that, Evan, just to make sure I'm clear, we're looking at there's a concern with the CD zoning. There's CD zoning for accessory use, and that came from the Vinyl Square Master Plan Committee, and then so the asterisks in the discussion will be that it'll be allowed in the CD zoning in the center along 110 and along 110 a little further down, but it will not be allowed up in North Chelmsford. Is that okay? Just want to make sure I was clear on that. And then are we, as far as the overall the dark stores, ghost kitchens, principal use, accessory use, are we anticipating this is going to lead to, are there discussions from, or has there been interest in making use of some of this vacant locations to be used by these industries, by these businesses, to help shift the commercial back and collect a little more for the CIP?
So there's no indication or awareness on my part of any proponent or interested party to operate a dark store or a ghost kitchen. And while I mentioned that Bertucci's has commenced, that was not something that came through town hall proactively. They obviously got whatever Board of Health permits they may have needed, but they did not place a call to my office or to the building commissioner seeking a zoning determination. So to answer your question, I'm not aware of any market interest. As I presented initially, these are a primary effort, one, to be proactive.
Proactive step.
But more importantly, to give our existing businesses some flexibility as they determine beneficial to their particular situation.
Okay, so addressing market trend really, and allowing for the ability to be ahead of the game as opposed to playing catch up later on.
Exactly.
Can I ask another question about the percentage? You said it's 30% a maximum that they can use the space
Yes.
for fulfilling the orders. So, and you did mention last week that a little bit of this is going on already, like, pick up something rather than have it shipped from wherever. If we didn't change the zoning laws, what would happen if they wanted to expand their operations in one of these locations? Like,
Yes,
say Kohl's or Stop and Shop, well, both of those are examples. Say Stop and Shop really does decide, okay, I'm going to close down the grocery store and I'm just going to ship things out of there. What would happen if we did not make this zoning change?
We would likely be in a position where the building commissioner would have to deny the use. The proponent would likely do an administrative appeal to the Zoning Board of Appeals. If the Zoning Board of Appeals upheld the building commissioner's determination, then one of two things happen. Either the business says that the town of Chelmsford does not allow this use, or they take it to court. I mentioned in my previous presentation to you that assuming that the town is amenable to these opportunities, this is a proactive step to send a clear message based upon clear criteria as to where, when, and how these opportunities would be available. I can tell you, and it should be pretty clear at this point, that communities that don't embrace these types of e-commerce are going to be left behind. And there's no one who can predict what the retail landscape will look like in 5 or 10 years. It's not, Drumhill will not look the same. Big box retail will not look the same. Chelmsford Street, where Kohl's is, where Stop and Shop is, and where Market Basket is, will not look the same. Those industries are already transforming. So the challenge for Chelmsford is, if you're not amenable to market changes with our big boxes and our retailers, what are you going to do when those retailers decide that Chelmsford is not the place to do business? The whole strategy here is to be proactive and acknowledge national and regional market trends that are taking place. If we say no, those businesses are going to make a business decision.
Mm-hmm.
I have one other answer. Okay.
Vicky has a question.
It's okay. I was just going to ask, will 30% be enough for them? Do we have market research that says that 30% is enough to keep them here?
So the Walmart example from Salem, New Hampshire, that's under 30%. I mean, that's a 100,000 square foot store, and they started with 20,000 square feet. Like all zoning, the planning board and town meeting has to start somewhere, and they can always adjust accordingly, up and down, based upon what Chelmsford feels is the local experience. I personally think 30% provides enough opportunity. Again, if you're a typical small, locally owned and operated business in Chelmsford, and there's hundreds of them, 30% is a tremendous amount of square footage. The example we talked about at Med Express, that'd be 3,000 square feet. That's a huge amount of space for a small, locally owned and operated shop. So I think 30% is a good number. It provides the big boxes with a good opportunity, and it provides the small mom and pop shops with ample opportunity.
Excellent, thank you.
So can I just ask a question? I'm not opposed to most of what is being proposed, but I am opposed to the fulfillment center. Again, for the unintentional consequences that sometimes can happen with this. Why not take that off and go with everything else and just propose? Because I do agree with you on a lot of having that flexibility, making sure that we're part of e-commerce, someone who uses e-commerce quite a bit. However, a fulfillment center is very different and has a different impact to a neighborhood, especially where our zoning, even the IA, which is kind of sometimes in residential neighborhoods, could have a significant impact. And to avoid, these types of consequences, why not just take that piece off of it?
So the best way to answer this, I think, is the next slide.
All right.
I added information pertaining to this. In this slide, the first upper portion of the slide speaks directly to this. So while the proposal speaks to full-scale fulfillment centers by right and industrial, the other zoning considerations is that currently any project over 20,000 square feet, non-residential, triggers a major business complex special permit. So by definition and by nature, any full-scale fulfillment center is going to be over 20,000 square feet. That special permit is exactly what you're referring to. That's the planning board's ability to apply discretion, apply logic and reason, and really take into account, exactly as you said, many of the nooks and crannies that our zoning map shows where industrial directly abuts residential. That special permit, as the community has recently experienced with the grist mill 2, truly provides the legal opportunity for the board to deny a project based upon the merits of the case. If they cannot adequately mitigate or minimize negative impacts, a special permit does provide the planning board the legal ability to deny. So, next bullet on this is the use table is consistent with existing uses within these zoning districts. By that, what I mean is e-commerce uses are very similar to existing uses that are already permitted in these zoning districts. In our CA, CB, CC, retail is already permitted. In IA, warehousing is already permitted. So a fulfillment center has very similar characteristics, and it functions very similar to a warehouse facility. Fast food restaurants and sit-down restaurants are already permitted within our commercial zoning districts. With the exception of the principal use fulfillment center, it's very likely that all of these uses are going to reuse existing square footage. Either it's vacant or there's a new tenant that's moving in. Of all the uses, it is the full-scale fulfillment center that would likely be demolishing existing square footage and building new construction. And so to provide some scope and scale based upon the current zoning, which is an FAR requirement, floor area ratio requirement, the maximum by right floor area ratio, the amount of total square footage that can be built on 1 acre, is a low range of 19,602 square feet. At the highest range of a 0.65 FAR, which does require a special permit from the planning board, would max out at 29,185 square feet. So those are the parameters on the low end and on the high end that a full-scale fulfillment center would have to work within. So when you take all of that into consideration, plus the final bullet, where fulfillment centers are targeting locations that are in close proximity to highway access and accessibility, that really comes down to 129 and Technology Drive. The notion that a fulfillment center is going to locate in South Chelmsford, miles and miles away from the highway interchange, is slim to none. It's not in an urban district. It's not in a high density district, such as the Boston urban core. Even if they propose to do it there, the major business complex special permit provides the planning board with the ability to apply discretion based upon the merits of the case. So hopefully, these other zoning and land use considerations better define and place in a framework, the other checks and balances that exist as it pertains to a full-scale fulfillment center. To answer the question directly, if we all agree that it's primarily 129 and Technology Drive, as it pertains to 129, that area has had annual vacancy over 500,000 square feet for over a decade. It is plagued with elevated vacancy rates, low investment, and low rents. It has just been within the last year or two where we've begun to turn that corner. It's still over 500,000 square feet of first generation office buildings remain vacant. So the question for the community is, what is the town's strategy in trying to repurpose that 500,000 square feet of perennially vacant office space? So the most obvious choice is that existing office users take up that space. The notion that that 500,000 square feet is primarily consists of 5 buildings. They range from about 80,000 to 100,000 square feet each. The notion that there are 5 80 to 100,000 square foot businesses looking to locate in Chelmsford at 129 are slim to none. So they're not going to be re-tenanted for office uses. And if they are, it's going to be incremental over a long period of time. So then you're left with, what other types of uses can those buildings accommodate? I can tell you, we've already discussed at our last meeting, Riverneck Road is a good example. There is a an interested entity who's looking at that property as in a totally different manner. They're not looking at it as 160,000 square feet of office building. They're looking at it as a scrape and build something new. So under current zoning.
But wait a minute.
Under current
So
zoning.
you're saying that's good to put in a fulfillment center in a neighborhood that doesn't have access to the highway? Is that I'm just trying to understand.
What I'm saying is the proposal allows the opportunity. The details, you don't know the details, I don't know the details of a proposal. Who's to say that it's a 50,000 square foot fulfillment center? And who's to say that based upon the FAR that they leave square footage on the table? It provides the opportunity. So the whole strategy for Chelmsford is to provide the opportunity, because we know from experience that we're not number one on the list for any particular entity or use. The beauty of Chelmsford is that we allow many uses. We're open to all kinds of opportunities. And you come to Chelmsford, to the elected planning board, you state your case, and we have a discussion. That's the same strategy here.
Thank you, Evan. And I'm not blaming, again, most of this is fine, I'm fine with. I'm hearing repeatedly in the town of these unintended consequences with our zoning. So I just want to make sure we're protecting the citizens and our zoning, and we're doing the right thing for what we want. Because, and I get your frustration, and I understand the vacancy on 129. But when we make these decisions, and you're saying, let's go fulfillment because we're not going to get office space. Well, now that's changing 129 and the direction, right? Like, if you want, 2-3 years ago, we wanted to do the overlay to allow amenities, to allow, potential restaurants in those buildings, which I fully supported. We have Thermo Fisher coming in. We did hear, and I'm not sure where that stands now with COVID, but there was a restaurant coming in. Now we start putting in a fulfillment house. Is what opportunity cost? What is the cost? Will those restaurants stay? Will Thermo Fisher stay when they're surrounded by, a fulfillment? That's very different than e-commerce. It's very different than, the small ghost kitchens and stuff like that. I'm just saying, I'm fine, but fulfillment center is large. It has large trucks coming in. It's a different look, and it's going to affect people's neighborhoods. So I just want to make sure that we're fully understand the risk when we vote at town meeting, and the financial impact, because, we might be making decisions which is a quick dollar tomorrow because we'll fulfill them, but maybe long term may cost us. So that's what just want to make sure that fully understanding what we're doing.
Understood. And my response is that Riverneck Road could be redeveloped as a warehouse distribution facility. Warehouse distribution is already allowed in the IA, so they could build a warehouse distribution facility. That doesn't even require a special permit for the use. Granted, they would trigger the major business complex, and you have a special permit. So this is why I say that kind of the scope and scale of a fulfillment center is already zoned via warehousing distribution. There are some differences between the two, but there's nothing preventing a 24-hour distribution center from being proposed in Chelmsford on Riverneck Road. That's a use that's already permitted. So the zoning framework.
Then why are we doing this then? Then why are we bringing this up? If it's already there, then why are we voting on any of this?
Because the e-commerce fulfillment center is a different use. By definition, the e-commerce fulfillment center has a retail transaction. That's where the retail transaction takes place. Warehouse distribution is normally wholesale, or it's a warehouse that is providing product directly to the retailer. So an Amazon fulfillment center is doing a retail transaction. That's why you have to classify it differently. The way we currently define warehouse and distribution, it doesn't specifically allow retail. So again, assuming the community wants to be open to this opportunity, we have to zone for it. What this proposal is doing is saying, we want to be open to the opportunity. We've put it we've defined kind of the scope and scale, and here's the framework as to how you would go about getting an approval.
Well, since we have someone that is looking at the Mercury building on River Neck Road, I think we owe it to the residents who live on River Neck Road. You know, I know normally we send out, like if someone plans to doing something, you send to the abutters, you know, if there might be a change. But since we're trying to change this at town meeting, shouldn't we be notifying the residents that the zoning is coming up?
The notification needed is the warrant article has been posted in this particular instance. This is not a specific landowner use that's being presented to the planning board for that requires a butter notification. It's a different situation altogether. The notice is the statutory notice provided through the warrant.
All right, well then I'll make sure I notify those folks on River Neck Road.
Okay, we're getting into discussion and debate right now, and that's for our meeting when we go to vote and discuss. This really shouldn't be a tax. It should be discussions about what the questions are for us to better understand why these are being presented, why they're being implemented. Honestly, I've been pretty lenient about jumping in on these discussions this evening, and maybe to the detriment of the discussion. But I think that these discussions we're going to have as a board in 2 weeks, and how we vote and recommend these articles, and just have gone a little far in a field of questions from the presenters and what is being presented.
I appreciate your comment very much, but I found what Evan had to say informative and is helping me think about my discussion going forward. My final question, and this is actually a question and it relates back, is, and I apologize if everybody else knows this but me, what happened, you know, the $60,000 grant the town got to evaluate what type of businesses that we should be having on our interchanges with Route 3? Because a lot of these locations mean that so we would have a consistent business style at the various Route 3, 495 interchange. Did that happen? You know, that was a whole warrant article.
So back in February, there was a Zoom presentation in which the consultant presented the existing conditions and some initial findings based upon those existing conditions. All town meeting reps were provided notification of that, and the property owners within the study areas were provided direct invitation to attend. Approximately, I would say 35 people participated in that Zoom call. And then just this past week, the consultant submitted the final draft, which included recommendations. So that we are in the process of reviewing that. The final version will be posted on the town's website. I can tell you that many of these concepts, particularly the e-commerce concepts, were identified in both the initial findings and the recommendations. It shouldn't come as a surprise. Obviously, the consultant isn't making any specific recommendations as to how to go about providing an opportunity. That's what this zoning proposal is intended to do. So hopefully that answers your question. I can send out the draft to the FinCom if you'd like, so you can see it firsthand.
I appreciate that. That's the reason I asked the question, because I wanted to know if this was one of the things that they mentioned. So thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you for everything. And I particularly like the clear maps. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for suggesting them. I think they do help. I know zoning maps at town meeting are going to be difficult. These are going to be grayscale, not color. But maybe in this particular instance, there'll be some extra time between FinCom book and the actual town meeting, where town meeting reps in the community will have more time to have a chance to view this PowerPoint and other resources.
So what we'll actually do, Evan, is we'll probably include this in our report book, and I'll ask that the PDF version that we put together have the color version. So the version is put on the website that's blasted out, and when it's posted, we'll have a color version of this, even though the physical book will have a grayscale.
Sure. So I believe the next slide we covered. If you could just go back.
Oh, sorry. Yep.
Yep. So final comment on this is the planning board voted unanimously, 7 in favor, to recommend this article as amended.
Okay. I think we're done with questions for this one. All right, moving along to Article 39, the non-medical marijuana.
Okay, so again, I'll just highlight the revisions. Under cultivator, via the asterisk, I specifically put in the PowerPoint that as defined by the Cannabis Control Commission, cultivation, particularly outdoor, does not meet the state definition of agriculture. This was discussed in some detail at the last night's planning board meeting. There are no farms, as we traditionally refer to them in Chelmsford, one that are in the IA zoning district or the CB zoning district where these opportunities would be permitted, with the exception of the town-owned farm off of Watton Street, just outside of Vinyl Square. And that lease is 100% controlled by town provisions. I don't envision any scenario where the town would allow outdoor cultivation of marijuana products where it's still illegal at the federal level. So the agriculture use should be pretty clear cut in black and white, but I know there's still some continued discussion in the community about that. The next clarification is the 5th bullet. I did make contact with the Cannabis Control Commission. They made it very clear that the gateway into their application process by a proponent is that the Chelmsford Select Board would have to sign the host community agreement. They've also informed me that the Select Board at the local level can decide what kind of process is involved in signing the host community agreement. So what I mean by that is there was some discussion as to whether the zoning permit could be required as part of the Select Board's process to negotiate and determine whether they want to sign a host community agreement. The answer is that it's locally defined. It's not, there is no state requirement as to how the Select Board would determine the appropriate process at the local level. So I think that provides, hopefully provides some clear guidance for the community, and particularly the question that Kathy asked me. Next slide, please.
Certainly.
So this is a new slide. This information is taken directly from the Cannabis Control Commission's website. It's all publicly available and viewable. This lists the approved and/or pending licenses that have been granted in the Greater Lowell area. So again, all of these lists have already received their local community host agreement. They've successfully negotiated with the local municipalities. As you can see, Dracut, Lowell, and Tingsboro. Tingsboro is the most recent of the three to kind of get involved in this particular zoning land use. What I've listed here are the licenses that are not related to dispensaries. So that while these communities have medical dispensaries and retail dispensaries, because Chelmsford, we're prohibiting retail dispensaries, and on the medical side, we already zoned to allow them. this list is only the accessory uses associated with adult use, non-medical. I will also say that some of these do operate a dispensary, but by law, they're required, if they so choose to do any of the accessory uses, they're required to get a separate license. So my point here is that some of these license holders are doing multiple activities within the industry. Next slide. Okay, this slide has not changed. As I mentioned, as proposed, this opportunity is only available within the CB zoning district and the IA zoning district, both by special permit from the planning board. Next slide. Okay, so just to finish up Article 39, the planning board voted 6 in favor, 1 opposed.
Was there a reason given for the opposition?
I don't believe any specific reason was given.
I watched the meeting, and I think that Mr. Walsh was the lone non-voter, and I leave it to anyone else to watch the planning board meeting to listen to the discussion. But he did seem to. I leave it to people to watch. So I think he, in general, gave his perspective, and it had to do. Well, whatever. Watch the meeting. Well,
I watched
I don't want to elaborate.
And I recommend watching it.
Yeah, I would recommend watching it. I don't feel like I should paraphrase, but he had concerns about. He brought up the origination of the question, whether it actually came from the master committee, master planning committee, and the communication between, and he appreciated the people who came in who do this for the information that they gave. So I think he was clear on his position, but I leave it to people to watch and make their own analysis.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. All right, are there any questions regarding Article 39? Other than those that have already been posed?
I watched the planning board, and what they said about the cultivation was that 2 acres was the maximum. What's the minimum?
Yeah, so this is what I meant by when I put the asterisk on the previous slide about agriculture. And you're picking up on what I think is still some confusion. For purposes of this zoning article, as it pertains to marijuana cultivation, the 2-acre agriculture, the Agricultural Commission is completely irrelevant. That is speaking specifically to how the state currently defines agriculture within the State Zoning Act. Within the State Zoning Act, you need 2 acres minimum in order, as one criteria, in order to meet the agricultural definition. So again, I can't stress enough, the Cannabis Control Commission has addressed this issue. It does not meet the state definition of agriculture as defined in the State Zoning Act. The Cannabis Control Commission has specifically decided to treat this differently than many, many other types of agriculture in the Commonwealth.
Thank you. For our purposes, if you had a property that was IA and you had a maximum of 2 acres, but possibly less than 2 acres, you could cultivate pot outside, right?
So whether it's the IA or the CB, as long as the use met the minimum lot area requirement in the IA and or CB,
Yeah.
they would meet the minimum threshold to propose the use to the planning board.
Okay. Now, somewhere in the presentation, it says you could get, the town could earn up to 3% of the sales. So say so, I mean, I guess in my mind is like, are we doing this for basically next to nothing? So, I mean, what numbers does that actually relate to the town?
I appreciate the question, and I appreciate the FinCom asking the question. Just to put this in context, the planning board did not, rightfully so, they did not discuss potential revenue, and as you've heard them say in the past, they don't zone for revenue. However, it did come up, and I did reach out to my peer in Tingsboro. Their most recent 2 indoor cultivation community host agreements, the proponent estimated annual retail sales of $5 million. So that equates to $150,000, 3%. So that puts this into some sort of context. You know, maybe one can make an argument that Chelmsford's locations are closer to the highway, they'll make a little more. But again, the planning board has not discussed the revenue component. I do have an email that I can forward out that provides a little bit more information than what I just described from my peer in Tingsboro. But in essence, their community host agreement and negotiations with their select board had an estimate, of first year of approximately $5 million in revenue. And then the town, as I mentioned, would be 3% would be $150,000.
Evan, is that the Cultivator Royalty Group LLC and?
Yes, Be Well and yes.
The Greenbridge Technologies.
Yes.
Okay, Mike.
I'm sorry, or maybe Progress.
Okay.
Probably Progress.
Can I ask, were those amounts, projected amounts of $5 million, are those 2 locations also having retail sales on site, or are they just strictly cultivating?
So 2 of the 3 are cultivators, and 1 is I believe a dispensary. So the information that I received was specific to the cultivators.
Okay, and there's no on-site retail with the cultivators?
I don't believe so. Again, I think one of those entities does have, as I'm looking here, they may have another license. I'm not positive.
Okay. Would they have to have a separate host agreement for the cultivation and the retail?
If they're in separate physical locations, yes.
Only the separate physical locations, okay.
Yeah. So this is where the whole, if you're going to go down the path of revenue as a deciding factor, this is where it gets very complicated fairly quickly. Some of these facilities are co-located, meaning they have a dispensary, they grow at the same location, they manufacture. Others have chosen to do it off-site. Other facilities, all they do is grow and they sell to the dispensaries. And then, as you can imagine, different growers grow different qualities for different purposes. Mm-hmm. So that would all be reflected in the potential gross annual revenue.
One of the things that was discussed last night was if you're growing it within a building, there are sewer capacity issues and water usage. Is there anything involved with what the planning board has set forth that would indicate that the company that's going to do this is going to have to cover those type of costs themselves? Because it could, here again, it could be a moot point if we don't have any sewer capacity. And so how would that work for cultivating indoors?
All private development is required to cover their infrastructure expense to service their use. In addition, as you likely know, all new development is required to pay water and sewer capacity and impact fees to maintain the system. But there's all of the developers and the proponents know that they're covering their cost to run their operation. And in this particular case, if someone were to propose one of these uses, particularly cultivation, with the sewer moratorium in place, they would likely need to provide on-site private treatment. I don't know if that's technically feasible. I don't know if it's cost efficient. Again, from a zoning perspective, which is all this is trying to determine if the community is open to allowing the opportunity and where to allow the opportunity. It doesn't mean that land's for sale. Doesn't mean that any property owner in the IA or CB zoning districts wants to lease their land for this purpose or sell their land for this purpose. It also doesn't mean that it's an economically viable venture based upon some of our infrastructure constraints.
All right, thank you. Any other questions?
Evan, I think in the planning board meeting, there was clarification on the question I asked about who has to approve it, like whether we needed the select board or the planning board or we needed both. Can you just restate that? Because I missed it even in the planning board meeting, what you had gotten.
Yep, so I did that. I did include that on the previous slide. At a minimum, it requires the select board to have a successful negotiation and sign the host community agreement. That's required as a minimum in order for a proponent to apply to the state for the state license. The select board can further define what the local process includes. So if they want to include getting the zoning permit, they can do so. If they want to have a public hearing, they can do so. If they want to notify abutters to the proposed location, they can do so. If they want to reach out to the Finance Committee or the Economic Development Committee, they can do so.
But there's no, so in this article, and I don't even know if it's appropriate, so I apologize. So we can't put anything in the article that requires that the select board, like in our article that says the select board can
There'd be no need
this and
to.
this.
There'd be no need to because it's a requirement within the Cannabis Control Commission's regulations.
No, I'm talking about, you had mentioned like the select board could send out notices to others or bring in, like, could we do that in our zoning or no?
Understood. I don't believe so because the host community agreement is not part of the zoning process. I'd have to ask council. I mean, I guess if council says we could, then certainly we'd be able to. That kind of goes back to what FinCom was discussing last meeting. Who does the community want to be in charge of dictating or deciding who goes first, who goes second, who's going to make the ultimate decision? So as the state law currently exists, it is the select board that is in full control of that. I'm not sure if it benefits the zoning bylaw to complicate it any further than that. I'm sure we could brainstorm and there's maybe pros and cons to going beyond what the state requirement currently is. What the Board of Selectmen could do is they can create a policy document or adopt regulation. And as you know, they're currently revising and updating policies at their upcoming meeting. So maybe that's an appropriate path moving forward.
All right. Any further questions? All right, I'm seeing none. Gonna hop right over, and again, Article 40 It's just the tie-in article where we'd have to adopt the new definition for retailer versus marijuana retailer versus marijuana establishment.
My only comment on this is the board did vote to recommend via a 6-to-1 vote.
I'm sure that was based upon the previous vote.
I would think so.
If someone's voting against it on the
They were different people. The single vote against were 2 different board members.
Oh. Okay. Was there any reason given for that? You know what? I'll watch and I'll check it for myself. That's interesting. Okay. All right. Any questions remaining for either Evan or Mike, or I think Nancy might still be here. I'm gonna stop my share here. Just check the nothing in the chat. Yeah. All right, Evan, thank you again for coming this evening and following up with us, and thank you for providing those additional information and also making some changes to those slides that helped clarify things for us. We appreciate that. And Mike and Nancy, thank you for being here to answer questions should we need them.
Yeah, and feel free to call. If you got a question offline, you could pop me an email. I'm fine with that.
Okay. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Could I clarify something that was said earlier?
Sure. On which article?
It was on the marijuana article, but it had to do with agriculture in general, in terms of state regs.
Sure. We're still technically there, so yes.
Thank you, sir. The 2-acre minimum for the state is not the minimum required for a farm, but is actually the minimum required to be not regulated by local zoning bylaws. So farms under 2 acres are certainly recognized by the state, but are not exempt from zoning, whereas farms over 2 acres are. The state agricultural census actually follows the federal agricultural census, and their qualifications for being a farm is $1,000 a year revenue and 1/100th of an acre. Marijuana is not considered agriculture under either one.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Good night.
All right. And then just following again into the same issue with the general bylaw amendments is deleting the prohibition of non-medical marijuana establishments. I have it under planning board because it flowed through, but it's a general bylaw. That would just be another follow-up article following the vote on Article 39. Mm-hmm. So now we're at review budget hearing and Springtown meeting warrant article schedule. And given that it's almost 9 o'clock right now, I'm kind of glad we're not voting this evening. Basically, what we have left is this. Next week we will not have a meeting, and it's because the Zoning Board of Appeals will have their first of the month meeting on April Fool's Day, and quite frankly, I'm kind of glad we're not voting on April Fool's Day either. So our next meeting will be the following Thursday, which is April 7th, I believe. That's off the top of my head. I'm sorry, April 8th. The following week, and that evening we'll start at 6:30, and we'll start fresh, and we'll start with our votes and the recommendations for all of the articles, including the budget. So as we usually do, we'll invite those people that have presented to come back and to attend and to watch and participate if there are any questions that follow up on those. Especially, I know in the Neshoba Valley Technical High School, they like to attend until their article has been gone over. Same with the Chelmsford Public Schools. So we'll reach out to both of them when we put that on the agenda. But as far as the town meeting is concerned, I believe we're obviously we're not going forward at the end of April. I believe that the new target date's mid-June for the town meeting, and so even though our vote will be coming a little later than usual, it's still earlier than last year's vote. But it'll be coming with ample time to prepare, review, and get the information out to the public so that they can, the town meeting members can review our recommendations, but also go back and view our meetings as well if they have any questions in the interim. There'll be a lot of time to review and to discuss those. And if anything that does come up, although we don't expect it in the interim, there'll still be time and room to reconvene and address if necessary. Anybody have any questions about the schedule? All right. Do we have any public comment this evening? I am not seeing any, and no one's asking to speak in the chat. Any press questions? No press in the room. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, guys, 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you.